Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Shula Neuman. Fair St. Louis is underway, and the VP Parade is tomorrow, the 4th of July. We'll take a look back now on the more than 140-year history of the Veiled Prophet organization. Founded in 1878, the organization is associated with civic pride and philanthropy, as well as large celebratory events in St. Louis. But the Veiled Prophet also has a controversial and, in some respects, very secretive history. Joining me in studio to talk about the VP's beginning, as well as the protests, evolutions, and ongoing traditions connected to it, are Percy Green, a prominent civil rights activist, perhaps best known for scaling the Gateway Arch 55 years ago this month, and Devin Thomas O'Shea, a Chicago-based freelance writer who recently finished an as-yet-unpublished novel inspired by the city's Veiled Prophet traditions. And Percy and Devin, I welcome you both to the program.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. We want to mention also that we invited a representative of the Veiled Prophet organization to join us as part of today's show, citing the busyness of its preparations for the holiday festivities. The organization declined our request, but said it would consider the invitation in the future. So, getting down to it, I want to go back to the history. And Devin, tell me, the VP organization, it does go back, as we mentioned, 140 years. How did it get its start?
Right. The original sort of woodcut of the Veiled Prophet first appeared in the newspapers during the 1877 railroad strike in the United States, which was actually very interesting for St. Louis because that was one of the, instead of just shutting down the railroads in St. Louis, all the factories and all businesses came to a halt. So it was actually the first general strike, or one of the first general strikes in the United States. And it was also one of the first strikes where both black and white workers united in solidarity. But it went on for about 6 to 7 days and then was eventually crushed by the police. And the next year, as a sort of way of this VP woodcut appeared in the paper and said it's not going to stop for any trolleys. And that was a big part of the strike, because all the trolley conductors went on strike. And so from then on, it was sort of used as a parade icon in the next year, in 1878.
And was it the kind of parade that everybody got excited to come see? The turnout was huge.
Well, not on the first year, because on the first year, there was still a lot of unrest in St. Louis, and the Veiled Prophet originally appeared next to a executioner at the top of the parade, and that Veiled Prophet is one of the only ones that we know, and it was the police commissioner who would have been in charge of crushing the strike. So the message was very clear for anyone who knew how to read those. And another thing that we don't understand fully today is that that first Veiled Prophet was very clearly decipherable as a first-wave Ku Klux Klansman, that it would have been very, especially to black St. Louisans, the symbology would not have been lost on them.
Wow. Because what did it look like? What were the symbols that that conveyed that message?
Well, it's the covered face and kind of dressed up as a wizard aspect has always been a Veiled Prophet thing. And we get a little confused about the Klan because in the second wave of the Klan...
in the 1920s.
Yes,
right.
After Birth of a Nation is out and a novel called The Leopard Spots, very much influenced how the second wave came about. It linked it to burning crosses and steepled hoods and a very clear thing about Christianity. The first wave of the Klan was much more about ragtag ex-Confederates dressing up as like moon men or like the ghosts of Shiloh, and sort of donning this old European style of like, it's called charivari, but it's kind of a sort of Mardi Gras party atmosphere in order to usurp the law and do whatever they wanted, and take the law into their own hands.
Oh, okay, so there was a connection to the Klan from the beginning. But I'm wondering also, organizations like the VP, like the Veiled Prophet, they actually aren't that unusual, certainly weren't that unusual in the United States during the Gilded Age, the debutante balls, the celebration of wealth. What set the VP apart at that time from other organizations that were similar to it?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that the original founder, Alonzo Slayback, had a lot of connections to New Orleans and the Mardi Gras traditions there with the Mystic Crew of Comus. It's another very similar organization. And actually, in 1878, the way that they got the first parade going was to buy equipment from New Orleans and ship it up the river sort of for free in order to jumpstart the parade.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So from the late 1800s until the mid 1950s, 60s, this organization holds their debutante ball and their parade in the evening. At some point, though, things start to change, or I guess that the exclusionary factor of it starts to become an issue. And I think, Percy, this is where you come into the organization. Your link to the Veiled Prophet, as it were, started in the mid-'60s, obviously not as a member since blacks and Jews were restricted from joining. Right. But you had an organization called Action.
Action, yes.
You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Action was a 100% volunteer protest organization. And, of course, the thesis of what we were doing at that time were protesting big businesses and trying to encourage them to hire blacks, especially black men, into decent paying jobs. Interesting enough, today we're talking about $15 an hour, but back then we were focusing on blacks having decent paying jobs, and especially black men. But first and foremost, I want to make it, to be understood clearly that Action's protest of the White Veiled Prophet festivities was strictly part of a strategy to enhance our protests for fair employment at certain big businesses, not to be part of it. In fact, Action's view of the White Veiled Prophet as a Ku Klux Klan organization by another name. According to Action, the VP organization should be abolished altogether if the city of St. Louis was to begin freeing itself from institutional racism and become a prosperous city for all people.
So you were targeting big businesses. How did you make the link to the Veiled Prophet?
Because we discovered that the chief executive officers of all of the large businesses that we were trying to encourage to hire at the time, and the names of those companies were Southwestern Bell Telephone, of course it's now AT&T, yeah. Laclede Gas Company, now Spear, Union Electric, now Amarin, McDonnell Douglas Corporation, now Boeing, and then of course the McDonnell Construction Company is the name of the company that built the arch at that time. And so the mere fact that here we were fighting these companies individually for something that we thought that was humane, and that's for allowing black men to have a decent paying job so they could provide for one's family. And then, of course, here these same people were sitting on an all white racist social club, them calling it the Veiled Prophet and us calling it the VP, because there was such striking similarities in their behavior, economically as well as socially.
Right. So one of the big protests, I mean, you protested in all kinds of ways. It wasn't, I was reading a little bit, if you want to tell me some of the street protests. And
well, I mean, we started 7 years out, 1965, we started our direct action protest against the parade. Mm-hmm. It was being held at night at the time. And then they would have the ball, I think the very next day, or it might have been vice versa. Maybe it was the ball and then the parade. But anyway, we targeted the parade by disrupting it. How did we go about disrupting it? We handcuffed a couple of years. We handcuffed ourselves to the float, and just sit down, and that would prevent the float from moving until the police come up with a way of how to cut the handcuffs from the float. We used a chain in one year, then we used handcuffs another time. I was one of the persons at during the first time I think we did that. Loretta Hall was a member of Action. Her and I both did that, I think in 1967, I believe it was. Mm. And then, of course, and then afterwards, we eventually evolved to having what we called the Black Veil Prophet Ball. Uh-huh. The Black Veil Prophet Ball was a protest, but it was a fundraiser, and we did the opposite of what was done with the white one. We invited, the public was invited, everyone was black and whites could come, and then, of course, after the crowning of the Black Veil Prophet, and the Black Veil Prophet Queen was called the Queen of Human Justice, as opposed to the Queen of Love and Beauty. Opposed to Love and Beauty. And then we would visit the white VP ball and demand that the black VP and the Queen of Human Justice enter and sit next to the white one or whatnot. I mean, it was that type of protest. Yeah. But during that particular time, we had always warned and made public that we were going to unveil the Veil Prophet from 1965 all the way up until the time that we actually did it.
And I'm going to get to that story next, but we do have to take a break right now. We'll be back shortly to continue this conversation, looking back on the more than 140 years of Veiled Prophet history. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Shula Neuman, and we return now to our conversation with writer Devin Thomas O'Shea and with Percy Green, founder of Action, the civil rights organization that used direct action to advocate for economic justice and good jobs for minorities. And we're talking about the history of the VP or the Veiled Prophet organization. And we want to mention again that we did invite a representative of the Veiled Prophet organization to join us as part of today's show. They cited the busyness of the preparations for the holiday festivities, and they declined our request, but they did say that they would consider an invitation in the future. So when we left off, we were at 1972, and you were, Percy, about to tell us what happened when you actually unveiled the prophet, the second time in the organization's history.
Well, the interesting thing is that over the duration of time, members of the elite, the chief executive officers, their children, apparently, become fascinated about the protesting. And, of course, some of them, later we learned that they were sick and tired of this event. And they made, during 1972, I believe it was, a couple of the debutantes or the members of the organization, the young folks, made available tickets to the event. And with Action being an interracial organization, this would be a demonstration strictly for white members to participate. And at the time, Gina Scott and Jane Sauer were the two persons who was available to be able to participate. So we made available the gowns, and they had the tickets, and they had all of the courtesy, whatever you had to do to get in, and they did that. And I think it's been written that they went to the balcony. Jane Sauer set up the diversionary by dropping the leaflets at one end of the balcony to cause most of the people's attention to go in that direction, while Jana came down the rope there, the balcony. What do you call it? I guess a stage. I guess you wouldn't call them ropes. You call cables, I guess. Right. She came down to the first floor there, and then of course it is true that one of the cables pulled away from the ceiling, and she fell about 6 feet, knocking the wind out of her. And some gentleman came up to want to help her. She told him, "Get away from me," and whatnot. And the mere fact that she was all dressed up in her gown and everything, he obeyed her, and she then walked around behind the stage, come up behind the white VP, and snatched his gear off, his headgear off, and threw it out into the middle of the floor there. And she described, she said everyone was shocked, including the Lancers. I mean, they were, and then all of a sudden she said she heard everyone say, "Woo!" I mean, everyone was just shocked.
Nobody's supposed to know who the veiled prophet is.
Nobody's supposed to know.
Right.
But it's interesting that the newspapers wrote it up in such a way that, and they wrote it up, and I have the document here where they want to say that the Lancers of the folks that were standing guard there quickly grabbed the headgear and put it back on him before anyone recognized him, which was not true. The St. Louis Journalism Review was the first and only newspaper identified, after we had identified who the VP was at the time. Tom K. Smith, he was a vice president at one of the banks, I believe, or Monsanto. Monsanto, that's what it was. Yeah. I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, this was a big deal, and it shook things up. Do you think that your protests did eventually change things for the Veiled Prophet organization?
Well, yes, but it didn't. Yes, I mean, in both ways. Hopefully, that it sensitized the chief executive officers to the extent that they were called out, being part of an all-white racist organization, and yet they were supposed to be claiming to be fair-minded in terms of their hiring practices. And we're hoping that. We don't see a whole lot of evidence, but these type of things they do cause some concern and for people to behave differently. The biggest thing, though, that bothered me was that the news media refused to identify and be fair with news. Now, if the news media would cover up something like that, I'm talking about the printed media as well as the electronic media, they knew that this person was exposed and they should have reported the news. But if they do something like that for this type of organization, what else is it that the news media are capable of doing?
Right. Well, I mean, I have to say, growing up at that time, I remember that the Post-Dispatch would have these spreads of the ball itself and all the debutantes pictured. And I mean, so there was obviously an enamored, there was an element that the media was enamored with the ball itself.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. It changed. They tried their best to try to minimize. You see, the biggest thing was that I think that when we went on the offense and called in the VP, not only racist and elitist, but we also pointed out that it was sexist, and we identified it so. But what hurt them the most was when we pointed out that they was auctioning off their daughters to white males of that same class. Now, they really got bent out of shape about that phraseology.
Yeah, and that you had white women that were part of that unveiling.
Yes.
So it's indicative that really rang true with the women involved.
Yes,
right.
By all means. The mere fact that Gina Scott and Jane Sauer, both white females in the organization, I mean, that. And then, of course, the interesting thing is that after they were arrested on that particular evening in 1972, I believe it was, they dropped all the charges. I mean, of course, we certainly was going to demand that the people that are arrested, they have to face the accusers. So
I want to move forward a little bit. And Devin, I mean, the organization has evolved since then. And in 2002, it created the Community Service Initiative. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what they have been doing to refocus and perhaps address a lot of these issues that were part of the organization from the beginning.
Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, I think the PR department for the Veiled Prophet has gotten a little more robust. They have like a new website, and the big difference is, of course, instead of in the Post-Dispatch where all these pictures of the debutantes appear, now they're in Town and Style, which is sort of or Ladue News, which are much magazines that are much larger, like sort of glossy magazines that go to only primarily the rich parts of town, which is indicative of another thing, which is, the Fair St. Louis actually used to be the VP Fair, and in 1992, when they took the VP out of it, it was sort of another step out of the public light, which is completely contrary to, the overall history of the Veiled Prophet Society, which was very much known to everyone in town. It was televised, and everybody sort of knew about it, but just suspected it was kind of this eerie ongoing thing. In terms of nonprofit, I think that there is a component where the debutantes have to volunteer their time to at hospitals and things like that. But I also don't think that these debutantes or many of the members of the Veiled Prophet Society sort of understand the history of the organization, or especially the girls participating in it. I don't think that they sort of know what happened with Action in the 70s or anything before that.
But as an organization... Go ahead.
The other thing is that this is a disease that needs to be eradicated. It needs to be eliminated altogether. St. Louis could do well without it. Why try to humanize something? That would be just like all of a sudden the Ku Klux Klan decide that all of a sudden now they're going to do good for the community and change the face. The best thing in the world would be for the Ku Klux Klan go out of business, and any such organization that has that type of image to go out of business. Now, if they want to go ahead and conduct that type of activity, as we so stated back in the day, have it out there in Ladue.
So you're saying though that
if they First Amendment rights, if they want to argue their First Amendment right, have it out there in Ladue. Right. Have that disease and spread it out there. I mean, it don't have to involve the whole entire city of St. Louis.
Right, but you're also saying though that regardless of any charitable activity that they engage in at this point, that doesn't negate their history.
Well, the thing about it, as far as I'm concerned, no. It would be just like if the Ku Klux Klan, I guess someone would want to say that there is some good, but I would not. That would be just like with the Jewish community, except anything coming from Nazi Germany. I don't know. We have to kind of look at those type of things. It seemed like to me, if you want to do good, bury the hatchet, bury that type of activity. And if one wants to, a group of people from that that want to do good, to start a decent organization and give it the type of birth that it needs to be, that involve all people and whatnot and all classes. Because this thing was bad just for the working class whites. The working class whites should not have been embrace this thing. They should have been protesting it as well.
Yeah, although the organization does allow a wider variety of people in at this point.
What, I mean, the White Veiled Prophet?
The White Veiled Prophet, yes. The Veiled Prophet. There are African Americans now.
Oh no! I mean, that's just that's something that I discount that. I'll claim it, but because the point is that it may well be that I will have an integrated unveiling of the Veiled Prophet this time rather than an all white, now that they're trying to superficially integrate it. But the point is that it's all about economics. These are the wealthy, white, primarily males, that controls the politics in the area. There's a whole bunch of things that need. The reason why we have so much, the reason why we don't have the type of crime in Ladue and Chesterfield and places like that is because of economics. You have the wealth, you have the companies, you have businesses, the people there, they make a decent salary. And you contrast that to North St. Louis, then you can see. Now, if the people were in Chesterfield and Ladue, had the same type of economics that we have here in North St. Louis, in the city of St. Louis. You have the behavior of the same. So I think that we need to look at what those people can really do, and putting Band-Aids on cancer, as far as I'm concerned, is not good enough. They need to eradicate the sexism, classism, and elitism, and I think that we can do that if they have a conscience of doing something worthwhile.
Agreed.
Well, given all this, Devin, I'm curious what drew you to research the Veiled Prophet organization and write a novel?
It's apparent that there's this history is full of interesting stories that all relate to St. Louis. But when I first started researching it, my mom had mentioned it offhand as just sort of a weird thing that happened every year. And then I was starting an MFA program in Northwestern, and this was like 4 years ago. And so I just gradually started researching it more and more. And I knew that I wanted to write a book that is about St. Louis, and sort of somebody once said that St. Louis is like a city that's obsessed with its own symbols. Like we just love the arch, we love the river. It's like baseball, these logos. But the Veiled Prophet is very much also a symbol of the city. I'm also just very interested in novels that involve conspiracies and secret societies. I think those are naturally intriguing, especially as ways to talk about larger concepts that you can't sort of see all at once, sort of like the widespread racism and segregation of St. Louis. It's not apparent necessarily on the surface, but it is everywhere sort of once you start looking for it. I think.
So that was it. So the debutante in your novel, if you don't want to give too much away, I understand, but
Sure.
Is she rebelling against the organization, or does she is she part of it?
I think that's like I use a few different characters in the book, but the main character, yes, is like a debutante who's being coerced into the debutante ball and is wrestling or unraveling the conspiracy of the history of the organization. So it's always a question of, it's not easy to rebel against your parents on that scale, especially when you're young like that, and to sort of reckon with the very difficult past in St. Louis is sort of emblematic of I think parts of the novel that I don't want to disclose.
Okay.
Well, but the interesting thing is it shows you the dynamics of direct action protest and how it's a double. Action always used it as a double-edged sword. It informs the larger community, especially if direct action is consistent. As I told you before, we had carried on a direct action protest against the white VP for 7 years prior to this. So therefore, that gave time enough for not just the average person to understand it, but even members of the elite. I mean, they would raise questions. They want to know, well, why are these people just wanting to protest this little innocent activity? Many of them didn't know the history of how corrupt it is as it relates to humans and the working class and whatnot. We feel as if that the working class whites needs to be free as well in order to for us to develop a city that is where we all can function. It should not be what it is, and the people, the rich and powerful, are the ones who are responsible. They control the resources. They can make it happen.
So we actually have to end on that note.
Why do we have to end?
Because we
have so much more.
I know, I agree. It's fodder for another time.
And I want to congratulate you on from what I'm hearing of your research and the book. Here's hoping that it will do well, because seemingly that you're hitting some good places, especially about the railroad strike, how the elite broke the railroad strike, and as a result putting on this parade or whatnot.
That's such a huge compliment.
And hopefully that white folks, I mean the working class, whites would be able to hear that and understand and join us in eradicating and getting rid of it altogether.
Well, we will have resources on our website where people can learn more about the history of the Veiled Prophet Organization and the history of action. I want to thank both of you for being here, longtime civil rights activist Percy Green and writer Devin Thomas O'Shea. Thank you both so much for being here. And one more time, I want to say that we did invite a representative of the Veiled Prophet Organization to join us as part of today's show. They cited the busyness of the season as they prepare for the holiday festivals. The organization declined our request, but said that they would consider our invitation in the future.
I'm praying for a rain.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.